Heal with Astrology presents What's Your Sign? This week we're going to be talking about Sagittarius. Everything you ever wanted to know about having a Sagittarius sun, Sagittarius moon, or Sagittarius rising, which is also called the ascendant, and just general Sagittarius information. We'll start with the basics. The picture on the top left-hand side is the symbol for Sagittarius. Sagittarius is traditionally seen as being ruled by the planet Jupiter, and there's some really interesting associations and themes that we'll explore throughout the rest of this video around that connection to Jupiter. So Jupiter is the biggest planet in the solar system. It's 1/10 of the mass of the sun. And just to put that in perspective, basically what it means is that you could fit 317 Earths inside of Jupiter. It's so big, in fact, that if you put every other planet in the solar system together and combine them, they would be less than 50% of the mass of Jupiter, significantly less than 50% of the mass of Jupiter. And this is something that I just learned myself, which I find really interesting. Jupiter is at a growth plateau. So basically what it means is that if Jupiter became any bigger than it currently is, it would increase in density, and as a result, it would decrease in diameter. So it would become effectively smaller, even though it was taking on more mass. And this is true up to 4 times its current size. So Jupiter could basically take on 4 times its current mass and still be the same size or smaller than it currently is. So it's sort of at this growth plateau. It's pushed things as far as it can possibly go without having to retreat. And that's a theme that we're going to sort of explore in the journey of Sagittarius throughout the course of this video. It has 14 times the magnetic field of Earth, no surprise given its mass, but it draws a lot of things to itself because of that incredible gravitational field and gravitational force. You know, for example, it has 67 moons that are in its gravitational field at the moment. And it's kind of interesting because even though it's this really big, expansive planet, it actually has it's the fastest spinning planet in the solar system. It's the fastest moving planet in the solar system in terms of how fast it spins on its axis, and that's related to angles and tilt and all sorts of stuff like that. But it's still an interesting sort of fact, and it's going to be something that's going to flow into the themes that we talk about today around the energy of fire that it's associated with, which we'll talk about in a moment, and just the energy of Sagittarius and how it runs through our birth charts and the influence that it has in who we become. So Sagittarius rules the 9th house of the natal chart. The 9th house is the house of it's an outer quest in order to accomplish an inner journey. So that outer quest can be a quest for knowledge, like higher education or looking into belief systems or that kind of thing. Or it can be a literal quest where you're sort of traveling to new places and experiencing new people and new cultures and having all of this kind of stuff. All of these kinds of external experiences which prompt you to go on an internal journey. So in traditional astrology, those are the things that it's associated with: belief, higher education, philosophy, and international experiences and international travel. We're going to move into the mythology. So I think there's very few myths that I look at and don't end up discovering that there's misinformation all over the place about them. But Jupiter has a massive amount of misinformation about Jupiter, and consequently mostly about Sagittarius, has a lot of misinformation about it. And so I wanted to just start the conversation by dispelling the most popular myth that's stated on the internet that's related to Sagittarius, which is the myth of Chiron. I'm not going to get into the myth because it's not associated with Sagittarius. So all over the internet, if you Google the myth of Sagittarius, it'll tell you that it has a relationship to Chiron, who is a centaur and who's related to sort of the wounded healer archetype. But the truth is that Chiron has no association whatsoever with Sagittarius. It's actually linked to Centaurus, which is a totally different system. And so it's an erroneous link that's taught that ties the two together. And it's sort of understandable, because the truth is that Sagittarius has a link to another centaur, but this centaur's name is Crotus, Crotus. And this centaur, Crotus, is the son of Pan, was a skilled musician and hunter, and invented the bow and arrow. And I think there's so many interesting things which I want to explore in the mythology. But we'll start with just the image of the arrow that comes up. So, Crotus and Pan, the god, they invented the bow and arrow. And Sagittarius experience, one of the biggest things that I talk about when I do readings for people who have really strong Sagittarius energy, is to give this image of sort of the bow and arrow. So if you think about it, you put the arrow inside of the bow, and you pull back, right? And when you pull back, there's this incredible tension that forms. Your hands kind of start to shake, and it takes a lot of determination and focus in order to maintain that pose, right? And then there's a sort of moment of release when when you let go of the string of the bow and the arrow flies through the sky. And then as it's flying through the sky, you have really no control over your experience. All the decisions that you could have made about where you're going, you've already had to make when there was that period of tension where you were aiming the arrow at your target, right? And so it's this feeling of freedom, but it's also this feeling of powerlessness, because you're out of control of where that arrow is going to go. And then the arrow finally sinks into the target, and there's this feeling of satiation, of completion, that you've got to where you wanted to go in the first place. But it quickly becomes part of that cycle again and spins back into the energy of the tension of the bow, being taut and readying itself for the arrow to fly. And a Sagittarius experience is always being in one of those three states of being. Either, that first state, which is this sort of incredible tension and this pull to go somewhere, to do something, to be something, to, be someone, all of those kinds of things. But this sort of energy of tension where you're trying to steady yourself and to get some focus around where you're supposed to go and what direction is the right direction for you, or that feeling where you feel powerless in your whole life. All the decisions that you could have made, you've already made, and there's this sort of feeling of letting go as the arrow flies through the sky, or that final energy of finally sinking into your target. And the interesting thing around the energy of sinking into your target is that when you finally get there, yes, of course, you have this sort of feeling of elation because you've accomplished something, right? But there's also this accompanying feeling of I suppose, discomfort that you can't stay there for long, and you must move forward and you must move on and start the cycle all over again. So I think that the energies of Sagittarius are well encapsulated in those three stages that we see in the relationship between the bow and the arrow. And the interesting thing about the mythology is that, or I guess placement even, or mythology, but where it sits in the sky, that arrow was directly pointed at Scorpio. And I think that's really, it's pointed at the head of Scorpio. I don't think the particular body part that it's pointed at is all that relevant, but it's pointed at Scorpio. And I think that's really interesting because I think for pretty much every sign, you can make a compelling argument that whatever sign you're in is answering the questions that are left unanswered by the sign that falls before it in the zodiac. And that's true for every sign. So, Scorpio is answering the sign, answering questions that Libra wasn't able to answer, and Sagittarius is answering questions that Scorpio wasn't able to answer. And so, or I suppose just moving into a way of being that isn't well encapsulated by the sign before it. And that's why it can be a little uncomfortable. The signs that are right next to each other don't necessarily have a lot in common for that reason. Is they're sort of trying to make up for the areas that are not as strong in the sign before it. And so for the sign of Sagittarius, it's interesting that arrow is pointing at the head of Scorpio, because it's sort of like saying, hey, I'm aiming for you. I'm gonna completely change everything that you've just done and take a totally new approach and just be completely different than you've ever been. And I think there's sort of an element of trying to master the energies of the sign before it with the new tools and new techniques. And so in the case of Sagittarius, one of the ways that it answers Scorpio is it says, I'm gonna find joy and optimism and idealism and peace, and I'm going to focus on all the wonderful things in life, and I'm going to focus on enjoying myself and going out and doing things and experiencing the world around me. So I'm going to, get out of myself, get out of my emotional body, stop looking at all the things that are dark and intense and difficult, and come into a space where I can see the beauty of the world around me and live this sort of very positive, expansive experience that life is going to bring me. And for anyone who hasn't heard my video on Scorpio or isn't familiar with my work, I have absolute reverence for Scorpio. It's a sign that I have incredible respect for. What I'm saying is that Sagittarius teaches us how to work with a brand new energy, and it opens a new doorway into a different kind of exploration and a new way of being, just as Scorpio did to, heal the things that were left unsaid by Libra, and so on and so forth. So, Sagittarius is a fire sign. There's some common themes when you look at elemental associations between signs. Fire it's this energy of doing. It's this energy of going out there and experiencing life to its fullest. It's not caught up in the head. It's not caught up in the heart. It's caught up in actually going out there in the physical world and experiencing life in the fullest, most sort of holistic way possible. That's sort of the energy of fire, is the energy of getting out there and having experiences and conquering the world, and just getting out there and living life as much as you possibly can in every moment you've been given. And elemental associations tell us a little bit about compatibility, not everything, but a little bit about compatibility. And so in the case of fire, there are 3 signs that have a relationship to fire that are associated with the element of fire. Those signs are Leo, Sagittarius, and Aries. And because those 3 signs all have fire associations, they sort of speak a common language, and there's an ease in interaction between those 3 signs. They kind of get each other, right? Like, if you have a really dominant if you have a really dominant Sagittarius in your chart, and you have multiple planets in Sagittarius, or you have lots of aspects that are leading you back into Sagittarius, then a really big part of your experience is coming into your life in a really big way and experiencing as much as you possibly can in the outside world. And the other fire signs understand that. They understand that energy of wanting to experience life, wanting to get out there and do things, and just not getting caught up in planning and processing and all that other stuff. That's not to say that you can't have someone who has a really powerful Sagittarius energy who also has, powerful Cancer energy that's driving you into the heart, or powerful Scorpio energy that's driving you into those really sort of deep, meaningful self-exploration of the emotional body kind of stuff. But in its sort of purest form, when you detach it from those other associations, Sagittarius is about that experience of fire, of really going out there and living every moment that you possibly can, instead of trying to interpret them. I want to say about compatibility, though, that Sagittarius is a little unique. And as most astrologers will tell you, that the most compatible sign for romantic or intimate relationships for any sign is the sign that's in opposition to that sign, and that's true. So the interesting thing, though, about Sagittarius is that Sagittarius, its natural match is Gemini, and that in itself isn't particularly interesting, but what is interesting about it is that Gemini and Sagittarius are almost, I would say, closer in characteristics and temperament than any other signs that are in opposition to each other. So it's a natural match between Gemini and Sagittarius, and it's the easiest natural match out of any of the opposing signs of the zodiac, because they have a lot in common, even though they don't share that elemental association like these other signs do. So we're going to talk about just a little bit about sun signs. So sun sign is who you are in stillness, when no one is around and when nothing is affecting you. And so as a result, it's how you define yourself. I think that's usually how I kind of explain it, but I guess what I want to include is that it's a really pure, honest representation of who you are. It's who you are before the world piled on. you know? It's who you are before someone taught you who you were supposed to be. And so there's something beautiful and very pure about the sun. And when you listen to, like, about sun sign, and when you listen to this video, you want to just sort of focus on what it looks like when that pure, sort of clean, authentic part of yourself is happy and healthy, and what it looks like when that part of yourself is not in a good space, and is having a hard time. And then look at how to divert that energy and use it, you know, to work towards you instead of against you. Sagittarius moon. So moon signs are about, they're about the heart and the emotional body. They're how you feel, what makes you feel, how you demonstrate those feelings to other people, just everything to do with the emotional body. But there's also intuitive energy that's related to the moon. So certainly it's about your heart and it's about your emotional body, but it's also about how you connect to the energies in the world, right? Like, it's about how you connect to non-linear knowing, how you connect to your own intuition, how you sort of connect to that instinctual, emotional part of you that knows things without knowing why you know things. So it has that intuitive link as well. And so throughout the course of this video, you want to sort of listen to all the signs and really look at what you look like, how other people perceive you, and the types of behaviors that come up when you're in a really good space emotionally, what comes up when you're in a hurt place or in a difficult place, or when things aren't going the way that you want them to go. And I think in this way also, like, you know, the kinds of behaviors that are coming up in you when intuitively you're getting information that you're not processing. So, you know, in the where's the ouch section, you know, you want to look really carefully at those behaviors, because when those things come up, you know, partly it's because you're coming from a space of hurt and where things are difficult and challenging, but sometimes it can be the way that your intuition is sort of communicating with you. It's how your intuition is telling you that something isn't right, that something's not working, and that you need to shift or change or heal or grow in some way. Sagittarius rising. Actually, like, I love this picture. I just, like, I love her for 1,000 reasons, but and I'm gonna explain, like, a little bit, but anyway, to start, I'll tell you what a rising sign. So rising sign is the lens through which the world sees you. It's the most obvious part of you. It's your personality. It's how other people perceive your actions and behaviors and all that kind of stuff. Of course, just because everybody else sees you in a particular way doesn't mean you see yourself in that way, and it doesn't mean that you are happy that other people perceive you that way, but this is the way that most people see who you are and how you move through the world. And the reason that I love this picture is because I kind of think it's cool that you've got this sort of, first of all, I mean, you know, I think she's a strong female character, but I also think it's really cool that you've got this sort of character who's this huntress, which is perfectly represented by Sagittarius, as we talked about earlier. But she's also this sort of, like, you know, she's fierce but optimistic and has a good heart and is generous of spirit. So she has all these beautiful, incredible qualities, and she manages to be like a little bit of a huntress and a warrior at the same time. And I think you're going to hear that throughout the course of this video, but that's part of what I think Sagittarius is having this, you know, incredible beautiful appreciation for life and this credible thirst for new experiences and new explorations, and this desire to sort of conquer the world around you, or at the very least experience the world around you, but coming from this really clean, beautiful, thoughtful, optimistic place while you're doing it. And we'll talk more about it throughout the course of this video. But basically what you want to know is, if Sagittarius is your rising sign, then, like I said, it's how other people perceive you. You want to look at the types of behaviors that are coming up when you're not in a good space. So in the where's the ouch section, you want to pay really close attention, because that's probably parts of yourself that other people are familiar with, that you may not recognize. And so you want to look at when those things come up and when those behaviors come up, and ask yourself some really sort of more challenging questions about why they're coming up and what you could do to shift and change and, you know, re-angle yourself into just a healthier, happier place where you're running this energy in a cleaner way. So more than anything, well, I think there's probably some really good associations, and I don't want to limit myself, but I would say one of the biggest things that's related to Sagittarius energy, which I call Saggy energy all the time, and we'll probably slip into that expression throughout the course of this video. So one of the most beautiful things about Saggy energy is that Sagittarius is on an outer quest to accomplish an inner journey. That's not my turn of phrase. I got it from Stephen Forrest, who's an astrologer I quite like. But it's an outer quest to accomplish an inner journey. And basically what that means is that, you know, in order to come into a place of self-discovery, Sagittarius fills its life with multiple opportunities to experience as much as is physically possible, and then learns from those experiences and shapes and crafts their own reality through them. And so for Sagittarius, you know, one of the big parts of the experience of Sagittarius is this thirst for adventure, this thirst for new experience, this thirst to fill yourself and your life with as many different opportunities as possible, and to just go out there and live, you know, in this like really powerful and meaningful way. And so the bottom picture I used was, you know, a guy who's, you know, clearly sort of done all this hard work and climbed to the top of that mountain just so he could have that experience, you know, to see this incredible landscape. And there's two things I really like about the guy. One, I think I like the fact that he's sort of half hanging off the cliff, because I think one of the things that you want to look at when you look at Saggy energy is that there is a risk-taking quality in it. There's this sort of willingness to like do things just for the sake of doing them, just for the sake of experiencing them. And there's this sort of willingness to take risks and this willingness to be a little bit impulsive in order to taste what life has to offer. So I like that. And I also like the fact that, like, you know, the guy obviously, like, he climbed to where he is. So he put in a lot of hard work to get where he wanted to get, to experience something that he thought would be really unique and amazing and wonderful. And part of Sagittarius energy has to be that willingness to put in the work and to really, you know, to plan the trip, or to, you know, pack your bag and make sure that you have everything that you need to go on that massive, you know, 3-month hike up Everest that you want to explore or experience or whatever, right? So part of Saggy energy has to be coming to this space of balance where you allow yourself to stay in that arrow, that sort of tightening space that I was talking about in the beginning, where that arrow is sort of tense against the string for long enough that you're prepared when you finally let go and go out into this place of exploration that the world you know, wants you to be in, right? And then the other thing I really like is the picture on the top where the guy is obviously helping whoever he's with, right? He's reaching out and he's saying, come with me. And I think one of the most extraordinary and beautiful and wonderful things about Saggy energy is this just incredible generosity of spirit and this willingness to help other people, and this yeah, it's a gift, you know, of like optimism and charity and wanting other people to experience wonderful things just as much as you want to experience them yourself. So Sagittarius, as I mentioned in the beginning, has a really close relationship to belief systems. And, you know, I would say that really Sagittarius energy, it can be, there's sort of two sides of belief, right? Like there's organized religion, which are beliefs that basically there's a lot more structure around. And then there's more like sort of philosophy, which is like the quest to find what you believe in. And both of those energies are related to Sagittarius. And so the first, I sort of, I did my best to sort of at least get the big three religions included in there. But, you know, Sagittarius energy, it has an association with religion, it has an association with belief, and it has an association with philosophy. And it doesn't really matter what religion you choose to practice or which one you feel most affiliated with. It's really that part of your soul, part of your spirit wants to be here and believe things that you can't prove. You know, like what belief is this willingness to consider that even though you don't have the facts right, you're going to trust your intuition enough that you're facing the right direction. And I think in a lot of ways that's what religion is. You know, we don't have scientific proof of what happens when we die, or we don't have scientific proof of reincarnation or all these kinds of things, but for some reason many of us believe in them anyway. like a huge percentage of us. It's like 15% of the population is atheist, which means 85% of people, despite the fact that we don't have substantial scientific proof, believe that there's something after this life, right? And that's sort of this energy of Sagittarius, this willingness to believe in something, whether it's, believing in yourself or believing in other people or believing in a religion, but this willingness to step outside of this idea that everything has to be linear and everything has to be logical and everything has to be proven, and start asking what ifs, and then trusting your intuition when it gives the answer. It's not an energy like Pisces. It's not sort of directly connected to source. It's not about intuition. It's about trusting that something bigger than you exists. And it's about trying to figure out what you believe and then taking it very seriously. And like I said, there's an association with religion. There's lots of Sagittarius who have very strong religious convictions and beliefs, but it doesn't have to be about religion. Sagittarius can just as easily have an obsession with Plato or Socrates or one of my personal favorites, which is Khalil Gibran, or a million others, right? It's not really about what book you believe in or what religion that you follow. It's this willingness to explore the fact that you don't know everything and that you can still believe something is true even though you're not sort of smacked in the face with it. So it's this willingness to engage in belief and to participate in something that's bigger than yourself. And I want to say, I want to expand this, because a lot of people tell me, I'm not religious, but I believe that there's energy in the trees and the earth and the sun and the sky and the universe. That's all belief as well, right? So, it's this willingness to see past three-dimensional reality. It's this willingness to believe that something bigger exists. And whether you choose to put a name on that or put yourself into a particular box or category, that's not the point. What Sagittarius does is it shows us how to believe in something bigger than ourselves, and how to find some sort of commonality in that belief. And so that's why all these sort of images are around that kind of thing. And so I talked about this in the last one. So, last one we talked about religious belief systems, but what Sagittarius wants to do is it has this unquenchable thirst for knowledge. So it's an unquenchable thirst for experience, and it's an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, but it's not, surprisingly, it's not really this sort of analytical, get stuck in the mind trying to prove everything quest for knowledge. It's this incredible openness, this sort of willingness to think, what if? What if I don't know this? What if this is different than I thought? What if this means this? What if it doesn't mean this? It's this willingness to stay open to all of the different possibilities of life. And so, like I said, it has an association with philosophy. What does life mean, and why are we here, and does it matter, and all of those different questions, right? It has an association, Sagittarius asks questions that you can't prove the answers to, and finds solace and peace in the people who say things that make sense, even if it's not sort of quantitative data that supports and backs the theories that they come up with, right? So it's this quest for belief. It's this quest for understanding their life experiences without necessarily having to put themselves in data and theories and research and things like that. And so that's not to say that there's no, if you have a heavy Virgo in your chart and you have a heavy Sagittarius in your chart, you could very easily end up in research. But pure Sagittarius energy on its own is not necessarily that way inclined. It's a philosophical energy. It's the energy, it's a theocratic kind of, it studies different religions and theocracy and all this kind of stuff. It's an anthropological kind of energy that wants to, milk and learn from other cultures and things like that, which we'll talk about later. But it's this energy of just looking at the world through fresh eyes and being willing to build new perspectives and new beliefs around it. It has an association with higher education for that reason. The association between Sagittarius and higher education, I think, is a really interesting one, and it holds true to this day. But what I think is really important when we look at the relationship between Sagittarius and higher education is that we look at it in a historical context. So when Sagittarius energy was first linked to higher education, it wasn't just like a a job mill. You know, it wasn't like you went to university, you took this particular course so you could get out and you could have this job and you could work in this field and you could make a certain amount of money, etc., etc., etc. Higher education, you know, back in the day in a historical context, it was a playing field for rich people who didn't have to go to school at all. They didn't have to experience any kind of higher education. They went for the love of learning, for the love of opening their mind and seeing new perspectives and all sorts of stuff like that, right? It wasn't about you know, getting a job. It wasn't about preparing yourself for the future. It was about thinking about life in this like big, meaningful way and trying to figure out the world around you, but without necessarily, you know, the intention of building something on top of that belief or building something on top of what you learned, right? So it's higher education in that context, you know. It's going to school because you want to learn and you want to grow and you want to hear the wisdom of other people's belief systems and all that kind of stuff. That's where the association to higher education comes from. That's not to say that it's not related to contemporary higher education, but a lot of times contemporary higher education, it fits better into the realm of, say, like Virgo or something like that than it does Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a different kind of energy that's not sort of the chop wood, carry it, water energy. It's the space that you get into when your life is safe enough that you can take a break and really think about why you're living it and how you're living it. So like I said earlier, Sagittarius has, you know, when it's clean and healthy and shiny and pure, it's this sort of optimistic, open-minded, idealistic, generous, and enthusiastic energy. And all those things are super exciting. Like it's this energy of glee, I think is the best word, or just joy in your experience and learning how to enjoy the little things in life and learning how to fill your life with as many moments of joy as you possibly can, you know. And one of the things that I think is really extraordinary about Sagittarius energy, and a saving grace, I think, for a lot of us, is that Sagittarius is an optimistic energy, which means that the Sagittarius in us is the part of us that even when life is difficult and even when we're going through really tough times, it's the part of us that keeps us afloat so we can make it to the next day. It's the part of us that hopes that something better is on the way. It's the part of us that believes that something better could be on the way. It's the part of us that it's just capable of staying in that state of hopefulness and idealism. I'm going to say that right now Sagittarius energy is really impacted by the energy of Saturn, and Saturn is the opposite. So Sagittarius energy is like all this energy, like I said, of, you know, idealism and optimism and open-mindedness and this generous, enthusiastic, playful, fun, experiential energy. But with Saturn in this energy as it is right now, it grounds that energy, and it can sort of temper it so that it doesn't have as much room to play as it normally does, and sort of strips away anything that's erroneous or anything that's not on a solid foundation or anything like that. And anybody who has Sagittarius energy that's complemented by heavy Saturn energy, like for example, if you have a natal Saturn in Sagittarius, or if you have a Capricorn rising Sagittarius, then this sort of optimistic, open-minded, idealistic part of you is balanced by this energy inside of you that is more grounded and realistic and sort of looking at the cold, hard reality of life. So it really depends where Saturn is in your chart, how much room this energy has to grow and flourish. And the further, basically, the less contact between the energy of Sagittarius and the energy of Saturn, the easier it is for you to run this energy, this sort of open-minded, hopeful energy, just in a really clean, pure way. And so Sagittarius, we talked about this, right? So outer quest for an internal journey. And so part of the outer quest for Sagittarius is the quest to find people that aren't like you, to find experiences that have nothing to do with the way that you're raised and born and you know what your family is like. It's seeking out new worlds and new experiences and new people, so that you can, you know, I don't know, partly just so that you can experience them, but partly so you can grow from them and learn from them and change from them, and partly because it helps you form a more well-rounded view of who you are and what the world is. So people with strong Sagittarius energy tend to have like a desire for travel, right? To see different parts of the world and to hear about different belief systems. And, you know, there's sort of the... in astrology, there's sort of the cosmic archaeologists or the cosmic anthropologists who, you know, look at the different ways that we live and ask real questions about why they're living the way that they are and how their belief systems are affecting their reality and all that kind of stuff. So it's this explorative energy. Again, it sort of links back into that Jupiter that constantly wants to expand and grow and change and shift, and all that kind of stuff is really well facilitated by travel. So yeah, also lots of Saggies, Saggy energy can often be about being a transplant. So I've met a ton of Sagittarius people who choose to live in cultures that they're not from. And it's this constant sort of experience of being the other, being the outsider, being different than your environment. And part of that is learning and growing and changing and healing and shifting through contrast. So surrounding yourself with people who aren't like you so that you can heal and grow and so that your soul can experience just a fuller life, right? And that can be through, travel, through, vacations, or it can be through, real hardcore travel, backpacking, or it can be through choosing to live in different countries to experience different ways of being and all this kind of stuff. And again, one of the things I want to say is that it's not a intentional choice. Like, Sagittarius is an external quest for an internal journey, but Sagittarius typically doesn't set out about having an external quest in order to accomplish an internal journey. It just has something inside of them that pushes them to experience as much as possible in the outside world, and that sort of push to experience things in the outside world eventually ends up in having an internal transformation. But the goal of the experience is just the exploration. It's not the product of the internal shift as a result of that exploration. So it's just a pleasant side effect. And it's how Sagittarius chooses to grow and shift on a soul level, on an unconscious level, rather than a conscious level. And so now we move into the where's the ouch section. And like the where's the ouch section in the chart is about, what happens when you're not okay, when you're hurt, or when you feel bullied or triggered or targeted, or when you're just sad or scared, or when life is not going the way that you want it to, or when you're in that place of when that arrow was flying and you feel powerlessness in your life and you don't know how to cope, right? So the following section are sort of like the natural coping mechanisms that Sagittarius uses when things are not going super well in their world. And the challenge, of course, is that they are coping mechanisms, but they're not the most self-honoring coping mechanisms. So you want to look at them when they come up and ask, what is my heart trying to tell me? What is my soul trying to tell me about what needs to be shifted in my life so that I can come into a more clean, healthy expression of this particular energy, right? And so we start with the where's the ouch impatience. I talked about this at the beginning. Jupiter, despite being the biggest planet in the solar system, is the fastest spinning planet in the solar system. It wants to move, and it wants to move now. And part of that is this sort of rush to make it from that tense, uncomfortable pull of the bowstring on the arrow so that you're finally flying and you're finally moving. And I think, the challenge is that tension, that discomfort that comes when you're planning something or when you want something but you haven't set about accomplishing it yet is actually an important part of your journey. So Sagittarius has to learn to live with a little bit of that tension in order to get to a space where you let go and let yourself fly at the right time without getting hurt, right? So if you act too fast as a Sagittarius and you don't give yourself enough time to process the decision that you're about to make, then you just have a smaller chance of success. And so, this feeling of impatience, of wanting everything to happen instantly, of wanting everything to happen quickly and stuff like that. It comes from this really clean, healthy place, which is that Sagittarius energy is about experiencing as full of a life as possible and as much in life as is physically possible. And so how can you do that if you're being held back and you know, everything takes forever to happen, right? But at the same time, you have to come into a space where you recognize that that even though you want to have this full life and you want wonderful things to happen, you want to make sure that you have planned and prepared yourself enough that you can control the direction that things are going to take and not lose yourself in it. So the short side of it is basically, if you don't let yourself be in that place of discomfort where things feel tense, when you're planning something to happen for long enough, then whatever you wanted isn't going to happen the way that you want it to happen anyway, and there'll be more frustration than you would have ever had by just allowing yourself to sit in that place of tension for a few moments longer. So when you come into that place of impatience, it's about reminding yourself that the reason that you're stuck where you are is because you have something left to do there before you move on to the next step. I'm not saying that that'll necessarily help or that'll make it easier, but I am saying that one of the shadows of Sagittarius is that impatience, that lack of willingness to wait for the opportunity to flourish, to bud, to get to a point where it's going to work to your benefit, right? I mean, you can pick the green banana or you can wait for it to, get ripe, and the green banana is just going to end up being bitter, right? Where's the ouch impulsiveness? So this fits in the same category, right? Like if your soul is screaming, I want to experience as much in life as I possibly can in the shortest period that I can possibly experience it, and I don't want to waste a minute of my time stuck in this should I, shouldn't I kind of thing, then you come into a space where you start to make impulsive decisions, and you want life to be so full and you want things so much that you don't let yourself sit in that place of tension where you plan things and where you think about things and where you allow yourself to take measured risks and to do all of the work up front so that you can accomplish your goal in a more meaningful way, right? So again, this is resistance to the part of the arrow that's that period of tension when the bow is pulling at you and you just want to run and you just want to go forward as quickly as possible. And so that leads to this sort of impulsiveness where you sort of just do anything for the sake of doing anything, which, to be honest, I mean, it's kind of not the worst expression of Sagittarius energy, but because really what your soul wants to do is experience as much as possible, good or bad, in a single lifetime, right? But the impulsiveness is going to work to your detriment in the long run, and so you want to find as much balance as possible and make sure that the decisions that you're making are self-honoring and are honoring other people in your life, and that you're not going to end up hurt because you weren't willing to sit for just a little bit longer in the planning stages that are so necessary in the evolution of your soul. Where's the ouch? Magical thinking and avoiding the hard stuff. This one's really big. I talked about this in the beginning. Sagittarius, that arrow is pointed directly at Scorpio. And Scorpio is the hard stuff. It's the deep, intense, emotional, difficult, squirmy kind of stuff that makes, that we sweep under the rug, right? And so what Sagittarius does is just gloss right over it and move right past it and do everything not to face the difficult, tough, hard stuff in life. But what happens is if you come into a space where you refuse to look at what's wrong, what's not working, what in the world is broken, what in yourself needs to be healed and shifted and changed and grown, then you end up in a space where it's all sitting in your subconscious instead of your conscious mind, and you're manifesting experiences that reflect the unhealed parts of your psyche that you're unwilling to look at. So in the long run, you end up much more hurt by refusing to look at difficult things and dark stuff than you do by just facing them when they arise, so that you can heal and shift and transform yourself through those difficult experiences. And one of the most obvious ways that I see this sort of magical thinking Sagittarius in shadow, or difficult Sagittarius energy, is in the sort of whole positive thinking movement, which was the idea that if I only ever have positive thoughts, then I'm going to have the perfect life and nothing bad will ever happen to me. And it's a very sort of, it's this energy of sort of like magical thinking that if only I'm perfect and I only think about wonderful, beautiful, happy, shiny things, then I can construct a reality that's perfect. And that nothing bad ever happens to me or anyone else I know. And there's two really challenging things about that idea. Three challenging things about that idea. One, the things that you manifest are a reflection of your feelings and your belief systems and your subconscious much more than they are of your conscious mind. So if you ignore what's going on and you don't face the difficult, hard stuff, you're going to manifest more difficult, hard stuff because it's going to be sitting and simmering beneath the surface, which is what draws the experiences in the first place. Two, that sort of magical thinking, if I'm just, happy and shiny enough, then my life will be perfect. It's problematic a little bit in two other ways. One, it puts us into a place of judgment of ourselves, because every time something difficult happens in our life, then we come into a space where we start blaming ourselves for it because we weren't positive enough or shiny enough, or we manifested it and all this stuff was awful, right? So it's this energy that like we close ourselves off to half of the experience of life because we convince ourselves that certain things are bad and certain things are good. And so in the New Age movement in particular, it's this idea that, that if you just close yourself off to all your uncomfortable emotions and are only happy and shiny and think wonderful, positive thoughts, then you'll never have anything difficult happen in life. The challenge of that being that you judge yourself then when anything difficult happens in life because you assume that there's something about you that hasn't been able to keep up this positive thinking mantra to build the existence that you're trying to build in the first place. Two, you start judging other people who are experiencing trauma and difficulties in their life because you assume that it's because they've manifested them, and so therefore you are coming from a place of judgment where you're judging their experiences and their process in their own evolution as a result of the experiences that you're drawing to yourself. So those are problematic. And the third thing I think that I think is really challenging about this sort of like avoiding dealing with the really tough stuff, magical positive thinking movement, is that it assumes that you're a creator and not a co-creator. It assumes that your soul's just going to let you have a perfect life, right? And the thing is that your soul wants you to experience things that are difficult and challenging. It wants you to experience all those Scorpio things I was talking about earlier, like it wants you to experience difficult emotions. It wants you to every once in a while have to experience illness or death or bereavement or all these difficult, complex emotions because they're a breeding ground for personal transformation and inner growth. So this idea that you can just ignore all the bad things in life and create your own reality where nothing bad ever happens and where you're surrounded by wonderful people who are shiny and happy all the time, it strips your soul of the opportunity for the best learning that's provided on this planet, and probably the very reason that our souls are here in the first place in order to learn. So there's really some very challenging stuff around this sort of idea of magical thinking and ignoring difficult, challenging experiences in life. And I understand where it comes from because, where there's an ouch, looks at the Sagittarius sort of angle. This is where you go when you feel unsafe. This is where you go when you're hurt, right? Is into this space where you can just make it go away instead of facing the hurt, because the Sagittarius sort of energy is this beautiful, gorgeous, optimistic, generous, idealistic, beautiful energy, right? And so you want to come back into the seat of your power, and you want to come back into a space where you're in this sort of stable, beautiful space. But sometimes you have to come out of balance to come into it. And part of coming into balance when there's hard stuff is facing that there's hard stuff and giving yourself permission to feel hard stuff. And in a Sagittarius context, that doesn't mean that you have to, become another sort of energy and all of a sudden dive into really uncomfortable emotions. Maybe that's not the right path for you. But, maybe that is about connecting yourself to a belief system. Maybe that is about, leaning on your beliefs or your philosophy or something like that to explain and understand the world that you're living in, so that it makes you feel safer having to experience things that are sometimes challenging. Maybe it is about, scheduling exploration or travel, or, maybe something is difficult happening in your emotional life. And so as a result, you decide to climb a mountain, to be honest, that's one of the best ways that Sagittarius energy can show up, right? And sometimes the biggest epiphanies that we have in life, the most beautiful moments of realization and transformation, can come when we're doing something, externally, right? There's, The Wild's a classic example of how she took an external journey which completely transformed who she was. A walk in the woods is another one. There's 1,000 different examples of how this energy can work. So it's not about becoming something that you're not, but it is about coming into a space where you give yourself permission to not feel okay, where you give yourself permission to get hurt every once in a while, where you give yourself permission to not be perfect, and, not always stay in that place of optimism and joy and generosity, and eventually you will get back there. But it's about giving yourself permission to not always be in that sort of magical positive thinking place. So this is another when there's an ouch, in other words, when things are difficult, when you're experiencing challenge in your life, when you're hurt, when you feel betrayed, when you feel vulnerable, all of these kinds of things happen. And so in this one, I have not appreciating what you have, and the grass being always greener on the other side. And I think that sort of comes with this Sagittarian energy, which is like exploring the world as much as possible, and like it's experiencing as much as you possibly can experience in life, and just having this full, whole life, right? So the challenge is that when you're sort of thrust and your drive in life is to experience as much as possible, that sometimes you take for granted the experiences that are close to home. You take for granted the joys of your current life because you're so focused on what you want to do next that you stop paying attention to what you are doing now and who you are being now and how you're showing up in your life. And it's this constant sort of looking to greener pastures. It's not working here, so I'll just pick up and move. It's not working at this job, so I'll just quit this job so I can go somewhere where everything's happy and shiny and wonderful, and I'll never have to experience the challenge that I'm experiencing again. And I think that's natural. Human beings, all of us, want to avoid suffering. We want to avoid things that are challenging, right? But part of this sort of energy is coming to a space where you can see in a more balanced way, where you can see the really wonderful things in your current experience and the really challenging things in your current experience. And then when you're making a decision to move on or experience something new or try something new, you recognize you're coming from a more grounded, balanced place in the decision making, right? And so Sagittarius, like I said, it's sort of this grass is always greener on the other side energy. Only when there's an ouch, when things are difficult or challenging. This is like an escape hatch, right? And it can be sort of this fickle or fleeting interest, right? It's this quest for newness, this quest for new experiences that's so potent and so powerful that you're trying to fill emotional holes with new experiences. And if the way that you're doing that is in sort of this outer quest kind of way, where you're dealing with your emotional challenges by going on an external quest and doing something meaningful, that's totally different, right? I mean, if you're a Sagittarius moon, you're having an emotional time, you decide to take a trek to Machu Picchu, or you decide to go on a vision quest, or you decide to, climb Mount Everest or travel around the world or whatever. Those are healthy expressions of a Sagittarius moon energy. It's an external quest in order to heal things that are challenging on the inside. I'm not talking about those kinds of things. What I am talking about is this energy when things get rough, where it's like the minute that you get something new, you're dissatisfied with it. You just want something else that's new and shiny. It's this energy of like fleeting interest, and it's trying to fill something inside of yourself. And like I said, Sagittarius energy can fill those things inside of themselves by finding a belief system that works for them, by studying philosophy, by, opening up the self to the idea that something bigger is there. Or, maybe it's through agnosticism, or maybe it's through atheism. Atheism is a belief system too. It's not about religion. It's about choosing to believe something and using that belief to salve emotional wounds, right? Using that belief to heal the self and to heal other people. And also, like I talked about, like an external quest or travel or study of other cultures or religions or experiences or all that kinds of things. So all of those are great options. You just have to be careful not to constantly quest out for, sort of thirst for new experiences and then never be present in the experiences that you're having, because by the time you're actually experiencing the new thing, you're already planning what you want to do next. Where there's an ouch, avoiding attachment and restlessness. So that's exactly what I just talked about, that sort of restless energy that's never satisfied where it is, never allows itself to sink in the target and just enjoy the experience of completion and enjoy the experience of actually accomplishing your goals, always gets to where they're going and immediately has to go somewhere else. And you know what, I'm not saying that Sagittarius energy isn't sitting still and doing nothing. That's not the energy of Sagittarius, and that's not what I'm advocating. All I'm sort of advocating is presence in the moment that you're in. So, you're naturally going to have a life that's more full of experiences than other people, because that's why you're here. But you should try as best as you can to enjoy the experiences that you're having and not check out of them. Right? And so when you have a healthy, shiny, happy Sagittarius, it has tons of experiences and does lots of really cool, fabulous, fantastic things, but stays present while it's doing them. When Sagittarius energy is hurt or wounded, or when the heart is wounded or the person is wounded, then it comes into a space where it's constantly trying to have new experiences to fill something and not being present while you're having those new experiences. And that goes with attachment as well, right? So if you're constantly thirsting for new things, if you're constantly thirsting to go out there and just taste the world, then it can be really difficult to settle down, because you're always looking at greener pastures. You're always looking at, what ways that things could be better, as opposed to just enjoying things as they are. And that can be avoidance of intimacy. It can be avoidance of structure. It can be avoidance of, settling down and building a life for yourself. And maybe that's right for you, but a lot of times it's not. A lot of times when you have, people who are completely free range, then you kind of can become quite isolating, right? And you kind of lose track of yourself because you're so focused on the outside world that you forget to build a life for yourself at home. So, and again, this is sort of like a where's the ouch thing, right? It's this thirst for greener pastures and this restlessness inside. And it's remedied by all the things I talked about earlier, which is, just being present with the experiences that you're having, filling your life as much as you want, up to the brim as much as possible, but actually being present when you're doing things, seeking out, a belief system, studying philosophy, studying the meaning of life, looking at the ancients, looking at archaeology, anthropology, all those kinds of things. All of those are tools to heal. And of course, you don't want to settle down if you're not ready or if that doesn't seem like the right step for you. But just make sure that it's not coming from a place of fear or a place of judgment or a place of hurt. And now we end up with possibilities. So possibilities is just like what the highest type of this energy looks like, what it can be, and what the purest version of this energy on earth. And so the top picture, I have a woman who's obviously just completed a really intense hike and is in this really beautiful landscape and just enjoying this moment. And I like this picture for a bunch of reasons. One, it captures that beautiful, adventurous, explorative kind of spirit of Sagittarius, this willingness to sort of go out there and try new things and be new things and to put hard work in order to have these incredible experiences and savor all of those moments. And I really like the woman in the picture because she's sort of at the top, and it's like she's taking a moment to just enjoy where she is and just enjoy what she's done and just be present in the environment that she's in. And I think that's a really healthy expression of Sagittarius energy. It's this thirst to move forward, but this incredible willingness to stop and enjoy what you're doing while you're doing it at the same time. And there's sort of hands in the pictures that are being held up to the light. It's not associated with any particular religion or any religion in particular. It's just this sort of it represents belief, right? And so coming into a space where you open yourself to different belief systems, and where you open yourself to different philosophies, and where you connect to something bigger than yourself, and where you connect to something that holds true and helps you live your life in the way that you want to live your life. And whatever religion or philosophy or belief system that is it doesn't matter necessarily which type that you choose, but it's this willingness to open yourself to to the wisdom of the centuries, to the wisdom of the ages, to the lessons that millions of people throughout history have learned and put on paper, so that we can all grow and share and learn through them. And I kind of liked it in the hands on the nature picture, because I think that there's so many people nowadays as well, who are tapping the wisdom of the earth, right? So whose connection, whose belief system, whose spirituality is really connected to feeling connected to the planet, to feeling connected to the energies of the trees and the earth and the mountains and the sky, and feeling our place in all of those things, right? So, again, belief system's not necessarily written down in a book. It's just experiencing something bigger than ourselves, and looking at the different ways that different people or different energies have explained life and its meaning and its purpose and our role in it, and then finding the one that fits best with us, so that we can live life in the fullest way and be supported by the wisdom of either the earth or the ancients or the sky or the centuries or whatever it is that draws you. The picture on the bottom left-hand side is two monks at Angkor Wat, which is in Cambodia. I picked it because it's one of my favorite places in the world. But I also picked it because I think it nicely sort of encapsulates this energy of Sagittarius, these sort of like this peaceful moment of belief outside of this temple is nice. I also think, as a North American, it to me represents travel, experiencing cultures that, I didn't grow up in and that aren't my own, and just coming into a space where you can learn from other people's experiences and learn how subjective our reality is, learn how subjective our experience of life is, and learn through other people's belief systems and way of being. And Sagittarius is an energy of learning through otherness, learning through being the other, learning through experiencing the other, through experiencing different cultures and traditions and beliefs and all those kinds of things. And I think in its purest form, it's sort of that energy that sits back and observes and what's going on around them, and then forms belief systems that honor the self from all of the wisest, people around the world living different experiences of life. And then the middle picture is a guy chilling at the pyramids, which is also about exploration, journeying somewhere to experience something. I chose the pyramid picture because there's a lot of people who believe that ancient Egypt and the pyramids and the Sphinx have a connection with a lot of sort of like ancient wisdoms. The pyramids were lined up exactly with the stars, for example, so they're the first sort of marker of ancient astrology. The Sphinx, a lot of people think of the Sphinx as sort of like a living library of the wisdom of the ages and the wisdom throughout the centuries and the lost wisdom of ancient civilization. And so it's this space of sort of, again, this sort of external journey to come into this space where something in you changes or shifts or grows as a result of you having an external experience of life. And the same is true for the last picture of the two people who were at the temple. Again, the external journey leading to internal wisdom. And I also like the fact that they're super happy doing it. So there's this sort of like openness, and there's this generosity of spirit, and there's idealism and all of these wonderful, beautiful things in life. This willingness to see the amazing things about the world, and to see the beauty in the world, and to show up and be present and be joyful, and to be optimistic, and to explore our lives and our reality and our world in just a really positive, enlightened way. Thanks for listening. This is Bonnie with Heal with Astrology.